Hello YouTube, my name is Kevin. I have been an arcade ball collector for about the last 2 years, and I've seen my fair share of different things and problems with games. So I've decided to start documenting everything that I do in hopes that it will help people on the internet get their games working. So today I wanted to talk about getting a new arcade game and getting it working. So I picked up this Robotron 2084 recently. It's a complete project. I got the monitor. The monitor's not in it right now. It looks pretty good. But before you go and just start plugging things in, you really want to take a look at everything that's going on inside. So, we'll grab a light. So, what we have here is the logic. This is all the gameplay. The board on the left has all of the ROMs for the game. This little board on the right is what I assume is the soundboard. It has all the sound samples, and I don't know what that is. So when we look inside here, we can see this other board, and this one, and this one. And those are all tapping off of this main transformer here. So the idea is the main electricity coming off the wall comes into this transformer. The transformer steps out the voltage and converts into a few different voltages, and then it sends it to this board where it gets regulated from AC electricity to DC electricity. So I can see here that I have a big capacitor missing. You can see that big white square. Looking at the cabinet here, there's a couple loose ones just sitting on the ground. So I know that right now, if I plug this in, really nothing's going to happen, because this board is the first kind of phase into the game working and getting electricity to everything else. This regulates all the electricity that's delivered to the whole arcade system, and it's currently in shambles. So these old power supplies are called linear power supplies. They're kind of older technology. I think this game was made in like 1980, 81, something like that. And they didn't have the technology of modern computer-grade power supplies that we have today. You can take a newer $20 power supply, a switching power supply, arcade power supply, and throw it in here. But that requires hacking up all these connectors and modifying the game from how it was originally designed. Even though that modern switching power supplies are a cheap, easy solution, this board looks pretty clean, all things considered. You can see there's a couple little hacks, just like some remnants of where those capacitors were. That doesn't look so perfect, but overall looks pretty good. It definitely wasn't on fire at any time. That's the big thing you got to look out for. So what I've done is I pulled up the manual online and I took note of all of these electrolytic capacitors. These look like little metal cylinders, and you can see that they're all over. And the problem is these things only last a certain amount of time, and over time they start leaking and they start just not working the way that they're supposed to. So my first step here is I'm going to replace all these electrolytic capacitors. I bought them from a guy named Ed, who runs a website called Great Plains Electronics. I get some other pinball stuff from him too, but he's got a great selection, great price. So they're very cheap. At the most, they're a couple bucks a pop for the bigger ones, and smaller ones are just a few cents. And replacing them is pretty easy in terms of soldering. You can see here, this is the what I assume is the main filtering capacitor. It's considerably larger than, say, like this other little metal one here. And this is what smooths out the voltage and regulates it so the game has a nice steady flow of voltage and it's not having any spikes or dips which can cause the game to stop working. So that's going to be my first step. I got those on order. Other than that, I kind of take inventory of everything that's going on here. You know, we can see all these fuses here. I'm going to pull each one of these out, check on the manual, and make sure that it matches up. Actually, I see here, there's a little diagram here saying what fuse should be what. This is stapled in there by the factory. So I'll just pull those fuses out and verify that they're the correct values. It's a safety hazard if you put in the wrong values. Another main point is this device. This is the bridge rectifier. This is what converts the AC voltage into DC voltage. And you can see it's pretty big here. And sometimes there's heat sinks on top of here which help dissipate the heat because this thing gets pretty hot, but not one on here. Let's see. So taking a look at the rest of the game board here, looks pretty clean. Considering how old it is, it looks pretty good. You can see a few more electrolytic capacitors here that I'll also replace, even though they look okay and they're not visibly leaking. Sometimes they start swelling when they get old and stop working properly. It looks pretty good, all things considered. I just kind of give everything a once over. These connectors here, and they're quick disconnect connectors. They're meant to make it so you can disconnect them and remove the board if you need to service it or replace it. They're kind of a pain to get off because these have probably been sitting on here for a very long time. But even though they're connectors, they don't make an ideal connection all the time. And so what happens is they get warm and sometimes they burn up. I've seen them more on pinballs. I haven't seen these too much on arcades where they go bad. But just visually looking here, we can see that they look pretty clean. They would start browning or turning yellow if they got too hot. Another thing to look here is these are all the sound ROMs. And you can see they have little stickers over what looks to be a little window. That's how they used to erase these chips back in the day. They weren't so easily erasable like they are now. So it's kind of important to have those covered, those little windows, because if you take a picture with a flash or if it's exposed to light, it can mess up the information that's on there. You see we have a few other cables here, and these look like they're in pretty good shape. You know, they weren't bent or kinked. They're not filthy. They don't look like they were on fire. So this board looks pretty good. Another important thing to note here is this battery holder. The problem is over time people would not change these batteries. I mean, these are just standard AA's, and they would start leaking acid. And you can see the location of the battery holder is at the bottom of the board, so it doesn't pose too much of a problem. But on pinball machines, it's a big problem because it was kind of in the middle of it. So you can see that it's pretty clean. There's been no battery acid. I may make an off battery holder or replace this with like a lithium cell, which a lot of people are doing now, but as for now, it looks pretty good. And let's see. The transformer down here, this is, you can see the main power cord coming in. We got a little service outlet here for plugging in a lamp or what have you. This is what I assume is the main fuse that regulates all the electricity coming in. And then this is a power filter. It just kind of smooths out the power before it comes in. Taking a look down there at the input, it looks kind of shady, like somebody was messing with it. And that's what you got to kind of look for, because these things can be electrical hazards. People that used to work on these games back in the day didn't necessarily always know what they were doing, so it can pose a problem when there are modifications that people did to kind of get the game working as soon as possible. They're called hacks. Sometimes they're on circuit boards, sometimes they're on wiring. Another big thing you want to look out for, which is very, very common, is the power connector. So a lot of guys like taking out this ground back in the day, and this is electrically very important for having a properly regulated electrical circuit, as well as just protecting the game and yourself, and from preventing your house from burning down. So you'll notice there's, let's see here, there's this metal braid here. You can see that it connects to the plane of this metal board that everything's mounted on. It's connected to this metal plane, and that's all connected to the ground. It's a very common concept in electrical circuits, and it's very important for mostly safety. Most of the time when I get arcade games, this ground plug is cut out, and that's very dangerous. Go to Home Depot, spend the $2 and buy a new plug and replace it with one that's properly grounded. You can take a multimeter and make sure that this is grounded. This should be grounded to everything that is grounded on the plane. What else? So this other board right here, you can see this whole contraption is a heatsink. And all that's really on here are these two transistors, and these are power transistors. You'll see styles like this used in some Atari boards, some arcade monitors. So those go bad over time. These are probably okay because they're so badass. You can see here, this whole metal contraption here is a heat sink. The idea is that the heat that this generates gets dissipated into this heat sink, which is made out of aluminum. And it has these fins on it with the idea that air flows through it and it helps cool these off. Other than that, this game looks pretty good. It's pretty complete. I found the schematic in here, which is always helpful. And it's just kind of cool because this thing's very old. And it probably was stapled on the back of like a service store, but I'm missing part of that. I'm just going to make another one out of wood. But it's very handy to have. You can see it tells you how everything's going to be hooked up. Fuse values, just all the wiring, you know. So if all this wiring was a mess, I didn't know what connector went where, that would help diagnose all that. What else? That covers most of the electrical stuff. This game doesn't have a monitor currently, but if it does have a monitor, you need to be careful because that thing will absolutely kill you. They store electricity over time, and it stays in there for a very long time. Another thing to note here is this little button. So you can see here, I got my bottom service door, which closes and latches, and then there was another one that goes back here to cover the monitor. And this is called an interlock switch. What it does is it cuts off the electricity of the whole game once this back panel that's supposed to be here is open. So you can see once the back panel goes on, it goes flush, and it allows electricity to flow. The idea is that once somebody opens it, it cuts off all the electricity, so you can't kill yourself. I've seen games where people just don't have the back door on these, and they think it doesn't work, and you push the interlock switch in, and everything comes alive. So important thing to note. Let's see. Got some other voltage connections for the speakers and the marquee light up there. Got a main power switch up here. Overall, it looks pretty good. Important thing to note is the bottom of the cabinet. A lot of times these games are stored in water and they start swelling because they're made out of cheap plywood. But this one looks pretty good. It's got some rough edges. These can be touched up pretty easily. Busted corners are very common. You can see this was actually made out of plywood. But overall, this game is in pretty good shape. The artwork is in really good shape. Could certainly use some touch-ups, but cosmetics are kind of an afterthought at this point. The way that I attack games is I get them working first, and then I make them look pretty. So I'll probably get a new control panel overlay. This one's pretty nice, but it looks like there's like a cigarette burn here. These are pretty easy to replace, pretty cheap. These joysticks seem good. So I'll probably clean up pretty nice for the meantime. This looks pretty fucked though. I mean, this is definitely heated up and bubbled. This is not something that you can just wipe away. Other than that, it looks pretty good. The glass is in good shape. It's just dirty. Coin door is missing some parts, but these are all pretty common parts. I actually found some where I got this game from. And coin box is locked. So that's a good quick rundown of things you got to check before you plug the game in. The important thing of why you need to do this is because you don't know what kind of voltage is coming out of that power supply. A lot of times they were adjustable where you could finally tweak it and set the voltage, and it needs to be a very set and defined voltage for the game to run properly. And if you plug it in and the power supply is turned up too high and it's putting out too much voltage, you could fry the game board, which is a very expensive thing, especially in the case of a game like this. So it's important to take note of all these things. And another thing that I would do, which I'll cover later, is plugging in the power supply without plugging in the logic game board and just making sure that the voltage is nice and smooth. So let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you the next time.